from Joe, ready to go. Congratulations, Richie. Well-deserved recognition during lunch. So we'll go ahead and reconvene the EEL board. I think Kate has a couple questions on Addendum 4, just to make sure that the PDT fully understands where to go with that document, and then we'll and then after all of the Addendum 4 discussion is over, Terry and I have talked, and Terry's going to come back up and resume chairmanship of the board. And so with that, Kate, you want to go ahead and ask your questions?
I just wanted to ask for clarification if the board would still like the ORCS options to be considered for quota management for the glass eel and the yellow eel fishery, or if they were more in favor of using the landings methods as specified by Rob and Tom.
Any comments on keeping those options in the document as they're drafted now, or removing them? I heard one, leave them in. Terry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think at this point we should leave it in at least through the summer, until the spring meeting. You know, we've got to think our way. Pat and I have to think our way through a few issues before we come back to the board in the winter.
Fair enough. John, yours on the next different issue? No, on the same one.
Are you saying to have either or both options in there?
It would be to include the ORCS options along with the two other options.
All right, as long as, yeah, that would be fine. See.
All right, any objection to retaining those ORCS options in addition to the other quota options that are included? Seeing none, they'll stay in. Kate, do you have any other questions? That's the one. Well, that's pretty easy. John, did you have another comment?
Yes, thank you, Bob. After Tom made his proposal for basing the yellow eel quota on recent harvest, and also to not allow any state to have more quota in there than they currently are getting, I discussed this with Tom because we have a situation where our eelers have not been able to get the bait that they usually use, so our catches have been depressed because of that. And I just wanted, I discussed this with Tom, and we'd like to have a little time to develop something where it would hopefully work out equitably for all states as we consider a cap based on recent landings. Thanks.
Can you please provide some more direction as to how you would want that allocation to occur? We would need that information from the PDT.
Yeah, can we get you something in the next couple of weeks?
Tom, you okay with helping out with that?
Yes.
Great. Tom and John have homework, so that's good. Anything else on Addendum 4? It seemed like a pretty comprehensive list that was explored before lunch, and everyone's in agreement in adding those in, and the PDT will work on those as they can between now and the February meeting. And Kate, I think the intention is to provide an update on the status of those options in February, and then bring the full document back at the May meeting. Does that sound good? Brad, does that sound reasonable to you, or Sheila, as the tech folks? Do what you can between now and February, and then bring a full report in May. All right. Yes, Pat Augustine.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did talk about what we were going to ask the technical committee to do, not add anything to the document, but Lance and I were talking about it, and his experience is that there are well-established parameters that are used both in Canada and Europe and other places, right, Artie? And that maybe if the PDT or technical committee has time, we should at least access ourselves to that to see if we can't draw upon existing formulas, whatever they have out there, to see if in fact we don't have to create a new wheel, but take a wheel that's already established, or formulas that are already established, and may be able to apply them. Can you do that? Would that be viable? I mean, during the next 6 to 12 months, or whatever that time frame is?
Some of that information may be site-specific and only applicable to those sites, so just that might be a limitation for using that information, but we'll certainly take a look at those examples and see if we can gather anything from it.
And to that point, they may be site-specific, but I think the problem is that we're looking at only one fishery to do our evaluation, as Dr. Lewis, like Dr. Lou Daniel mentioned earlier. We're using information from one geographic location. So if you don't have time, we don't have time to look at all the other locations up and down the coast. Again, the Canadian one's been around for a long time. The European one's been around for a long time. I just think we're missing an opportunity at least to look at it. If you would do that, we'd appreciate it. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, if I can, Bob. I was just interested not to go into every site and try to get specifics. It's just to look at a relative comparison of what their glacial fishery is, what their silvergill fishery is, and do they have a bait fishery? Do they have a yellowgill fishery? And Fishery Board of Canada should have an annual synopsis like we do, and also the European countries would have some sort of a segmented report on the dollar values and quantities. So not an in-depth of the science, but just a general comparison of the categories we're trying to manage in the U.S. to what the European countries have done, and within legitimate eel range of the viable body of the species. So we're not isolated and trying to say we're doing this sort of thing. It becomes a full picture.
Great, thanks. Yeah, as Kate said, the PDT will look at that, and as time permits and as data is available, they'll include that. Anything else on Addendum 4? Not seeing anything. Terry, you ready to resume chairmanship?
Thank you, Bob, for doing the heavy lift this morning. Kate, you're going to provide us with an update on the proposed listing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the board is aware, there was a petition submitted to U.S. Fish and Wildlife to list American eel under the ESA. Back in 2010, the positive 90-day finding was published by U.S. Fish and Wildlife in 2011. That listing may be warranted. Staff and funds are actually being allocated now for the status review. In August 2012, a lawsuit was filed by the petitioning agency to make, in order to have Fish and Wildlife make a 12-month finding on the petition. And the lawsuit a settlement agreement was approved by the court requiring Fish and Wildlife to publish their 12-month finding, a proposed rule by September 30th, 2015. The service is expected to begin work on the status review in early 2014. And the Commission has provided the data from the stock assessment for use in the Fish and Wildlife Service status review. The second item is that was included in your briefing material, just as an update, is a letter from the European Commission to the Fish and Wildlife Service on the implementation of CITES in the European Union, and it just is making Fish and Wildlife Service aware of the fact that the EU is not in a position to allow export or import of the European eels until the end of 2014 in response to the population status of the European eels. And that concludes my report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kate. Are there any questions for Kate? Seeing none, you're back up.
This is the Fisheries Management Plan review for the 2012 fishery. That should say in 2012, landings totaled just over 1 million pounds. This was an 8% decrease from 2011. Landings increased within the kind of New England region, and we saw increases in Maine and Connecticut, and in the southern mid-Atlantic, Potomac River, Virginia, and North Carolina. Landings declined in the northern mid-Atlantic region, including New York, Delaware, and Maryland. Landings from New Jersey, Maryland, and Virginia accounted for each totaled over 1,000 pounds of eels and accounted for approximately 77% of the total. 100,000 pounds. Thank you, Joe. It's because I'm talking too fast. Sorry, Rob. and accounted for 77% of the total coastwide commercial landings. Landings of glass eels were reported from Maine and South Carolina, and in 2012 totaled over 22,000 pounds. This was a 143% increase from 2011. The table in the document shows the landings by state. Landings from New York were not yet available and are not included. In 2009, the MRFS, now MRIP program, stopped collecting data on recreational harvest of American eels. The FMP requires states and jurisdictions to conduct a Young of the Year survey to monitor the annual recruitment. In 2012, Rhode Island and Florida's recruitment levels were below average. New Hampshire, New York, Virginia, and Georgia had average survey results. The states of Maine, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland had above average YOY catch results, and actually all of these states had their highest YOY catch on record. Florida had the lowest YOY catch for their time series in 2012. So the trends kind of vary across the board. There were just a few changes to monitoring programs in 2012. New Jersey re-implemented their Young of the Year survey. It was not accessible in 2011 due to a collapsing overpass, but the monitoring did resume in 2012. And Pennsylvania and DC both initiated electrofishing surveys in order to supplement their Young of the Year surveys that they have been conducting, because they catch very few or no Young of the Years in those surveys. There were no changes to the management programs, but the states will begin implementing the regulations required under Addendum 3 in 2014. The FMP stipulates that states may apply for de minimis if their average commercial landings constitutes less than 1% of the coastwide landings. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and Georgia have requested de minimis. And all the states that applied for de minimis do meet the de minimis standard. New Hampshire was not included in the FMP report, but they did apply for it in their compliance report, and so it's shown here. The PDT recommends that the board approve the de minimis requests for all states that did request it. The PDT requests all states collect biological data from their commercial landings and greatly appreciates those states that do collect this data, as it's very helpful. The PDT requests that states work with their law enforcement agencies to include information on confiscated eels from illegal or undocumented fisheries. And additionally, the PDT requests that states that do not regulate their personal use fishery should be required at a minimum to permit their participants in this fishery and collect harvest data in order to provide an estimate of catch and efforts. And that concludes my report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kate. Are there questions for Kate? Bill?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back on the de minimis, didn't we already vote on that? Did the states that were de minimis or could be de minimis, didn't we already vote on that maybe the last meeting or something?
There was I think the FMP review was done in February for this year's fishery, and so these are de minimis requests for the 2014 fishery.
Oh, okay. All right.
Deb?
If it's okay with the board, I'd like to request that Wilson Laney come up and provide a little bit of a status update and technical question clarification. Thank you.
Wilson, come on up.
Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of technical comments, and I also was going to give the board an update on the Roanoke Rapids Dam eelways, because everyone seems to always be interested in how those are going. First comment is, I know a lot of us tend to use the terms elver and glass eels interchangeably, but just keep in mind those are two different size classes when we're talking about those. So elvers are generally larger and obviously pigmented as opposed to glass eels. Relative to the Roanoke Rapids Dam eelway, consistent with, I think, what has been observed in the glass eel fisheries for the last couple of years, the numbers that we're passing at Roanoke Rapids Dam have now jumped up again by an order of magnitude, so that thus far this year we have passed 802,000 elvers at the 2 eelways at the Roanoke Rapids Dam, and the operator of the eelways, Chad Coley of Dominion Environmental, and I think that given that we haven't reached the fall preferred temperature around 15 to 16 degrees, it's entirely possible that we'll wind up passing over 1 million eels at Roanoke Rapids Dam this year, because they seem to have a preference for 15 degree or thereabout, and we usually see a big peak in November. So I'll keep you posted. We're anticipating that number going up. Relative to the issue of incremental mortality between life stages, I certainly agree with Dr. Daniel and with Mr. Feigenbaum that that's something that we really need to know. It's a very difficult thing to determine, as you all know. American eel is probably the most complicated species with which you deal because of its life cycle. One of the things that we've discussed is that probably about the only way you can do that would be to measure what's going in and what's coming out and what's inside of a given watershed, as Mitchell suggested. And I believe, and Brad and I talked about this a little bit after lunch, but I think the technical committee has discussed in the past that one approach the commission may want to take, and certainly this would be a board decision, is that if you pooled your resources and sampled a watershed on a regional basis, perhaps one in the South Atlantic, one in the Mid-Atlantic, and one in New England somewhere, you might actually be able to do that, because you would have to measure glass eels, not necessarily elvers, but certainly yellow eels inside the watershed, glass eels going in, yellow eels inside the watershed, and then silver eels coming back out again. And it would be important to measure those all in the same watershed, and also from north to south or south to north, take your pick, to get that latitudinal variability in age to maturity and those sorts of things. And I'll just mention again that in those places where one or the other life stage is currently being monitored and counted on an annual basis, it gives you a great opportunity to do that. And I'll add parenthetically that the concept that Dave Simpson mentioned of trying to provide some sort of credit to those states that are working hard to implement conservation measures or restoration measures would be good sites to do that. The Roanoke would certainly be one good site to do that, and Mr. Travelstead and Dr. Daniel would conceivably benefit greatly by virtue of the vast number of eels that they are passing upstream into the upper Roanoke River now. So I think that's all I needed to say, Mr. Chairman. I think that's an alternative approach to monitoring the population that you may want to take, that would focus in, it would give you some idea of what the latitudinal differences are, but also would give you ultimately the data to generate the science that Dr. Daniel would like to see, and I think everybody around the table would like to see. And it would, though, as Brad and I discussed, take somewhere in the neighborhood of a minimum of 3 to maybe as many as 7 to 10 years to generate those numbers with a sufficient degree of statistical rigor to generate the mortality, the incremental mortality estimates between those life stages. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson, for the report, and it's good to hear your voices come back. Before we go on to Pat, are there any questions for Wilson? Yeah, Walter, you have a question for Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Well, Wilson or possibly staff, do you think it would be scientifically valid to do a study like that on a relatively small watershed? I mean, obviously it would be cheaper, but I mean, if you picked relatively small watersheds in 3 different areas, would there be, or does it have to be a big area to make it have validity?
I think Wilson's suggestion to have a range is probably better to have a sample size of the same types of watersheds. So if you could have a range of types of drainage areas, it might provide more information. And if you could ever be so lucky to have a decent sample size of 7 or 8, then you could start to regress some of these watershed characteristics against the eel population characteristics, and that could be really valuable.
Are there any other questions? Follow up?
Yeah, does anybody have an idea of what the budget for that would be?
Wilson?
The short answer is no, but I think we could generate one. On the Roanoke and any other facility where there's a FERC licensed hydropower facility that is required to monitor those eels as part of their license, then the applicant in those cases usually pays for that, although it depends on whether or not a settlement agreement is in place and whether the agencies have agreed to pick up part of the cost. But on the Roanoke, we did have a period of time for 3 years where Domtar, a paper company downstream at Plymouth, was paying for East Carolina University to monitor the larval fish community, and they were picking up glass eels as part of that study. So we could probably put some numbers together for that. And to the size of the watershed, if you wanted to capture the relationship from the glass eel stage to the silver eel stage, then obviously you need to pick a watershed that's large enough that's going to be generating, you know, both of the silver eel life stage on the back end. Some of the coastal watersheds, which do receive tremendous inputs of glass eels, I don't have a feel, maybe Brad or Sheila do, for whether or not those fairly short coastal watersheds generate silver eels or not. I just don't know. We have a devilish time catching them down south, catching the silver eels, that is. We still haven't figured out how to do it. One of my colleagues, Mark Cantrell, in our Asheville office, has been trying for about 3 or 4 years in a row now and has yet to catch one. So I think, given time, Sheila, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the technical committee could probably come up with an estimate of how much it would cost. And again, it would be greatly to the commission's advantage to pick a system where, you know, some FERC licensee is already doing the monitoring of one or more life stages, because that would theoretically save the commission dollars.
Brad or Sheila, you have a follow-up?
So I think that's something the technical committee can address. We do have information from studies with FERC projects in particular. It would be good if there's fisheries involved in those rivers as well. But I think we can come up with some cost estimates. And I know some of the technical committee members in the past have talked about doing those kind of projects in their state and have some ideas of what that's going to cost. So it's something we could put together.
And I just want to remind folks that the recommendation from the Stock Assessment Subcommittee now is that any jurisdiction that would want to open up a new glass eel fishery would need to conduct such a life stage survey. So what Wilson's offering would be an alternative to that approach.
Pat, Augustine.
I was just going to say it was a great job. Are you ready for a motion?
Still have one more hand. John?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. I was just going to say, in answer to Wilson's question, that in Delaware, back in the early 2000s, we did do a study of silver eels coming out of a small coastal impoundment, which is right where we sample our glass eels. And in terms of numbers, it was not many were coming out of that. It was a very small watershed, but at the same time, it's a very attractive area to glass eels. So we get hundreds of thousands of glass eels at that spot.
Are there any further questions? Okay, Pat, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess we're ready to have a motion to approve the 2012 FMP review and state compliance report and accept the de minimis status for the following: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and Georgia. And I believe that's a complete list. That's my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Well, let's get it up. It's seconded by Bill Adler. Is that your motion, Pat?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you do want to include the names of the states, please? And Georgia.
Seconded by Bill Adler. Are there any comments? Okay. Move to accept the 2012 American Eel FMP Review and Compliance Report and approve de minimis for the following states: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and Georgia. Motion made by Mr. Augustine and seconded by Mr. Adler. This is an action item, but is there a need to caucus? Is there an objection to, are there any objections? Seeing none, this motion is approved. We're on to Mr. Daniel. Dr. Daniel.
Thank you. I just my head is spinning from Wilson's outstanding report. And my understanding is that these eels that are passing into the Roanoke River are not glass eels. These are year and a half old eels. And how could there be 1 million year and a half old eels or a year and a half old eels for anything endangered? So, and that's just in one river system, fairly small drainage basin too. So I'm wondering, you know, is this information that maybe the service could use to make a decision quicker on this eel listing, you know, and get that monkey off our back? So I guess it's a question to the services or whoever's more familiar with the ESA stuff than me. I don't know if there's some magical issue with the 2015 deadline, but that's something we're going to have to deal with and stress about when it really doesn't seem like it's warranted.
Someone able to answer Lewis's question? Deb.
Sure, thank you. There's a process with the ESA and doing a 12-month finding, and we will take all new information into consideration, but there is nothing that actually speeds up the process. This is, okay, thanks.
Always trying to think of a way to move it along faster, but it never doesn't work most of the.
Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Daniel, in response to your points, I would just remind my fellow commissioners that the 2007 Fish and Wildlife decision not to list the eels, it spoke rather, it relied very heavily on the fact that the recruitment was stable and even showing some positive signs of growth. I think I've mentioned this before, and I'm sure many of you know this, but in approving the 90-day finding and deciding to take another look at the question, the FWS specifically said that they are standing by their conclusions from the 2007 decision on almost all of the factors that they consider when making an ESA review. The exceptions, there were 2 exceptions. They just wanted to take another look at the species because of A, the new information about the prevalence of the parasite, and then the second one, of course, global warming or, you know, changing climate patterns. So I think that the Fish and Wildlife Service has already exhibited a pretty good understanding that the recruitment is positive and trending in the right way. But they haven't, you know, they've expressed their concern about these other issues for which perhaps new information has come forward.
Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to correct Dr. Daniel on one point there, Lewis, the Roanoke is not a small watershed. It's a huge watershed. Much of it lies in Virginia, so it really is a large watershed.
Is there any further discussion on this agenda item? Okay, Dr. Lewis, you're up.
Well, I just gave myself a great segue, didn't I?
Doing well.
Yeah, I think everybody has had an opportunity to review much of the information that's been presented by the American Eel Farm, both at the August meeting and here at this meeting. And from my understanding, from multiple conversations with Mr. Allen, he's talked to many of the commissioners are seated around the table. So I think you know who we're dealing with in this request. I submitted a letter to the board requesting you folks allow me a harvest up to 750 pounds of glass eels for a bona fide brick and mortar grow out facility in North Carolina. If we were to receive this allowance, this permit, I would issue a scientific collecting permit to American Eel Farm, and they would be authorized to permit maybe up to about 8 fishermen to go out and harvest these eels.
with a very specific window of time that they would be able to harvest, and then a very specific period in which they'd have to grow the eels out, about 10 months. So there'd be, as an example, it might be a February season and an October time period, which would be the only time that those eels could be sold, was during that time period, after that time period of grow out. Those would be observed at the Trenton facility, and then they would go straight to Atlanta, where they would then go straight to wherever they go. So there would be no well, there's always a possibility for anything, but it minimizes the chance of undersized eels getting into the market, first off, and secondly, it doesn't really impact our domestic market. So I think I've got the constraints working with my staff on a scientific collecting permit. Call in when they go to harvest, call in when they get back, daily reporting on the amounts, and the ability, if there's one misstep, to pull the permit. And I can do that immediately based on my authority in North Carolina with our scientific collecting permit program. So I know there are probably a lot of questions, and part of this, and I don't want to get too much into the addendum, but it provides us with an opportunity to collect some information in North Carolina that we just don't have. And so I think it is a valid scientific collecting exercise, not only for the elvers, but for what happens to the elvers, the grow out. Is it a reasonable thing for us to pursue? And that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to get it now and not waiting for the addendum, is because we need to get, the eel farm needs to get moving. They're sitting without a whole lot going on, and so I think economically they need to get moving. And I think that's the best reason for doing it this way as I can. It also provides us with an opportunity, I think, to have some more information. Maybe we'll have some more information when we develop addendum 4, because if we get started this winter, we'll have some information before our spring meeting, and that could be very valuable and important information for us to have. So I'll stop there because I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and I'll try to do my best to answer them. As far as business models, though, that's really not my forte, so I'll do my best.
Okay, a lot of hands are up. I'm going to start with Bill Adler and go right around.
If I might ask, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Daniels, what he meant by grow out, I always thought that it took several years for eels to grow to other colors, you know, yellows and silvers and whatever. So that was one question, what he means by grow out within a matter of 6 months or something. The second question is, did this facility get built before, you know, we even would give permission to do this? What provoked them to build the facility ahead of time?
You want me to answer that?
You've got your hands full, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. The facility was built 15 years ago or more by Mr. Kuntz. He's been in front of this board, and I think one of the amendments or the original plan basically kind of held out a little hope for them to be able to do this down the road. But Mr. Kuntz had some health issues, and now the facility has been bought by Mr. Allen's now a partner in American Eel Farm with Mr. Kuntz. And so this is the story as I understand it, all right? And that is, the facility was purchased. The equipment in the facility, it was just determined 6 weeks ago. So even since American Eel Farm came to the commission last meeting, has discovered that the facility is only good for growing out to fingerlings, all right? Because what happened was he purchased 2 7,500-gallon tanks so that he could expand his operation and grow these things out to the legal size. That's his ultimate goal, from my understanding. But what he found out from talking to the guy who he bought the system from was that by adding those two 750-gallon tanks and thereby adding capacity to his system, he threw all of his biofiltering and all of his CO2 things and oxygen stuff and all these other things that they got going on in that facility, renders it basically useless. So his approach now and his request now has changed from the original request that he made or that he suggested to us in August, which was to immediately grow them out to 9 inches. He wants to be able to grow them out to the 5 to 6 inch range, I guess would be an elver stage for this initial grow out opportunity. And then those would be sold overseas. Now, my understanding is that the long-term plan is to build the system up in order to handle the grow out of the larger eels and be able to process and market those larger eels ultimately. So, but we're asking for a scientific collecting permit. This is going to need to happen. They're going to need to be able to harvest eels every year. Well, this may come in conflict with Addendum 4. So that's kind of one issue where this does kind of go hand in hand. So if we approve this ultimate motion to adopt, grant this, if that's approved, then we'd only get about a year's worth if we don't have something in the addendum. So we need to sort of be a little forethoughtful in how we want to handle this whole aquaculture situation with this request and addendum 4. So I hope, Mr. Adler, that answers your questions. But that was a game changer about 4 to 6 weeks ago, from my understanding, and so that's why the request on the time has changed.
All set, Bill? Paul, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was supportive of this concept of developing some domestic production capabilities, but this approach, this just sounds like an elver fishery, and if we kind of approve this the way this is presented, then we're probably going to have some difficulty when I submit the proposal that I'll submit to get some elvers to put in my garage or something for a couple of weeks, and then I'll sell those. So I guess I'm having a little bit of a problem with the way this has evolved. So I'll listen to the discussion and see where it goes, but it's not what because I initially did support this in a big way, but I thought it was going to be a long-term aquaculture project. So, but this leads to my next point. As we develop the aquaculture elements of the addendum that we've already talked about, I'd like to see a definition of that it's not just holding them for less than a year and then selling them in out of the country somewhere, that sort of thing. I'll view that as an aquaculture project.
Pat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the concept and at the initiation of this program, I was 100% in favor of it because it is domestic. It would add to the economy and so on. But when I got into the details, similar to Mr. Diodati, unfortunately, I tried to allude to that to a couple of the folks who are part of this. The red flags went up, and I'm looking at the landings for state and life cycle on table 1 in 2012. We have Mr. Daniel hoping that we can get the state to have 750 pounds or whatever they are. And so fast calculation, at $2,000 a pound, that's $1.5 million or thereabouts. And if that comes off the top, it comes off the overall quota. And if it comes out of your state, then fine, do it. But that's my concern. I looked at your harvest and North Carolina's harvest of yellow eels at 66,580 pounds, and some others such as South Carolina with 1,400 and nothing in glass eels at all. I look at Massachusetts with 462 pounds, yet we're willing to give away 750 pounds of these little guys, who in a matter of 6 months will grow out to be 6 inches or more, and I'm not sure what they'll sell for. So, like Mr. Didotti, I'm concerned at how this has changed. I think the idea of what we're trying to do in the state of North Carolina is very good, valid. It's the right approach. But having changed the game, and now that we have moved the amendment off till next year, which would have allowed you up to 5% of your quota, and I hearken back to your comments earlier, if we could have a transition or flip-flop, how many of these or how many pounds of these for how many pounds of those? I think once we got that, I think that's where we have to go. So unless this game plan changes again, where it's more than just little animals in, bigger animals out, we make a ton of money and we put more little animals in. And yeah, we put some back in the environment. The problem with those that are going back into the environment, I don't believe the protocol has been developed yet. You may have it in your state, I'm not sure, Dr. Daniel, but the protocol has to be developed that meets the criteria that you can, in fact, put them back in the wild. So no question, this is the right way to go. The real question is, how do we get there in lockstep so everybody doesn't share the pain, quote, quote, comes out of everyone's quota, that it comes out of the state that wants to support and recognize this. And I would hope that if we finally get to that point, the state of North Carolina will benefit from the process of selling economically. So that's where we are on it. I don't want to shoot the thing down, but I do think we need more work on it. It's a very viable approach, and I think they have to go back to the drawing board and kind of come up with a couple more steps. That's my opinion, Mr. Chairman.
Lewis. Yeah, and please don't think I'm not equally concerned about the change. It came as a surprise to me, but it also came as a surprise to Mr. Allen, I think. And so not trying, I mean, I wanted to make sure that that was clearly on the table, that his approach has changed. And it did, it raised concerns and red flags to me. And I can't disagree with anything you said or Paul said on the concern. The only thing I can do is try to move forward in trying to make this work using as stringent a controls on it as I know to do. And that I'll do if y'all think it's a good approach. But I don't want you thinking that I didn't understand the concerns, and so they're not coming as a surprise to me.
Final follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Daniel. I guess the real question is, if we were to approve this letter, or you to go forward with it, with the controls you're talking about, whether we or you would make the decision to take some of your quota, existing quota, figure out a transfer of whatever, if they change the protocol in the direction they want to go, so it's more in line with what you folks believe would be the right way to go. Would you look at doing that relatively quickly, or would you wait to 2014? Have you tried to get a timeline as to how you and your staff would react if, in fact, we did move forward?
Well, in terms of moving forward with allowing the harvest, yes, I've got a protocol set up on how the SEC, the scientific collecting permit, would be issued, and the conditions, et cetera. We've got that fleshed out to our comfort level and our enforcement folks' comfort level. But again, that's under Addendum 4 right now. If we approve that next year, and there's no provision for an aquaculture allocation, then we're dead in the water. And then the other point that I think is very important for me at this point is that we're going to go out to public hearings in North Carolina. I'm very curious. I have a feeling I know what the commercial yellow eel fishermen's opinion might be of transferring some of their quota into glass eels for an aquaculture operation. I don't know how successful I'll be in that argument, and I may be shot down immediately. But I don't know. I mean, I would think that it would be in the best interest of a state, if it's a fairly close, maybe one-to-one relationship, that 1,000 pounds of glass eels would be far better interest of the state and our fishermen than 1,000 pounds of yellow eels. And so they maybe get willing to give up 1,000 pounds, maybe a couple of thousand pounds. But if it impacts their ability to fish and their seasonality and things like that, they're not going to support it. So that's the issue that I think needs to be vetted through the public process, which is the addendum. And so what this does is bridge the gap. And it's a gamble. But I mean, American Eel Farm really doesn't have much of a leg to stand on. So, I mean, they either get this permit, which gives them an opportunity to try it this year, and then it goes away and they go back to Maine to buy their eels, or they have a long-term situation. And that's going to be up to this board next year.
Final question has to be begged to follow that. So wouldn't we be better served in the state of North Carolina and your eel fishermen if you were to do that survey prior to us kicking off an action plan that's going to allow you to do something else, or do you feel you have to do that in parallel? In other words, if you went back and said, look, we're going to survey all of our eel fishermen, and by the way, guys, maybe get some preliminary from Brad as to what that transfer might be, and query them, and then come back and say, hey, guys, commissioners, fellow commissioners, here's what we want to do, and here's what our state will support. In the meantime, we're going lockstep with Amendment 4, and that option is in the document already that would allow, in this particular case, up to 5%. And who knows when it goes out to the public, someone might come forward and say, well, 5% is not enough, and maybe go back to that 750 pounds that you were suggesting might be a pot that comes off, I'm sorry, amount that comes off the top of the pot. Maybe another option, but Mr. Chairman, could we find out where we might go with that, and then I'll shut up. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I'd like you to shut up now.
I shut up
with all
much.
respect, before we, I don't want to debate, have the board debate this issue right now. We've got other hands and questions, and then we'll get back to you, Pat. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be clear, as someone who owned and for many years ran a 100 metric ton eel farm, that I'm sympathetic and generally supportive of developing eel aquaculture in North America, and it's nice to see people involved in the process. But speaking about process, I have a preliminary question, and I'm sorry that Bob's not here, but we can call this a scientific collecting permit, but basically Mr. Allen in his presentation and his written materials has been very, very frank about the fact that he's trying to support a commercial operation. I don't think there's any problem with that, but I do think there's a concern that there'd be no public process. If we were to pass a motion right now, how could we pass a motion now without putting this out to the public? And if we really want to gain a benefit scientifically from $1.7 million worth of eels, well, I think Wilson and Sheila and all the other folks working on habitat issues and the very studies we were just talking about right before lunch, when no one can say what would be the budget to do these complete life cycle surveys in multiple locations, no one could answer that question, but I bet you $1.7 million would get an awful lot of that work done. So if our concern as a board is to gather scientific information and to use this resource to advance our knowledge, then there's a much better way of going about it than to award one commercial facility a head start, a leg up over others. So I just would urge that as this process goes forward, it go forward openly, fairly, transparently, and most importantly, in a manner that all the members of the public, including the at least 5 entities that have come to me in the last year with proposals to open up eel farms in North America, would all have an opportunity to pursue that on an equal footing. Thank you.
Okay, we're quickly crossing the line between debating a motion that doesn't exist yet, and I'd still like to go around the table of questions. I've got John, Pat, and Richie. Anybody else? John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I empathize with your predicament there, Dr. Daniel, but just to kind of reiterate, I don't see where the scientific value of this will come. When Mr. Allen stopped by to discuss this with me, I was wondering what the business plan was. If you grew these out to 9 inches, it would seem like a very expensive way to produce bait eels. I just didn't see how this would work. In fact, the only way I do see it working is to sell them almost immediately. And in that case, I think the idea of allowing states to have glass eel quota, other states that don't have it now, is fine, but I don't see how this really fits in as a scientific permit.
Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am generally supportive of the concept of grow-up facilities in North America and the domestic side of this, and moving over to aquaculture. But I think of the aquaculture facilities that we regulate in Maine, whether it's mussels, whether it's salmon, whether it's soft-shell clam, they all start with a seed base or a juvenile level that they are buying, not not being able to go out and harvest. So there's an upfront cost. The gentlemen in question have eel dealers. They're eel dealers in the state of Maine. They have the ability to get that product and make that investment if they wanted to do so in that direction. So my concern becomes not from the intent, the overall intent, but the utilization of a scientific collector's permit for a commercial reason. So I'm trying to figure out how to balance that and how to help move that forward. So.
Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really agreeing with Paul and Pat. From a state that is looking like we will have no quota, I question the fairness of allowing this kind of harvest. And New Hampshire has a facility that probably would fit this mold right now that's not being used in aquaculture. And if we approve this, could New Hampshire get a similar permit? And I just think it's opening up a door at this point that we're not able to handle.
Marty.
Mr. Daniel, I did talk to some of the fishermen regarding that in North Carolina. I don't think there's going to be much support for it. And how would you actually pick out the fishermen that go and fish those glass eels?
Can you repeat that question?
How would you pick out the fishermen that are allowed to fish those glass eels while other ones won't?
I wouldn't pick them. You have to the permit holder to pick the fishermen that would fish for them.
So the fishermen that have been there for 20 years on the water every year might not even be picked and fish glass eels, and they would see their harvest just go away. I don't think that's very fair.
Lance?
Yeah, just reflecting on business plans of 20 years ago, we're at a very minuscule step up into aquaculture of, again, as I've mentioned, my attitude is that we have a phenomenally abundant recruitment of glass eels in every state. But at the time, we were soliciting foreign investment, and we do have some leverage here in terms of the product we're selling abroad. And although it's not the board's position to do this, some other outside economic entity might help in easing our problems with glass eel take. And the fact that we think it's undermining the whole Atlantic fishery, which I doubt, I would say that almost any state wanting to get into aquaculture should have a plan that does, first of all, look at an endpoint of a food product, not a bait product. This species is too valuable as a delicacy abroad, not that much in the U.S., so we have a tremendous advantage of bringing that sort of endpoint product into the glass eel husbandry business. Although bait is so much valuable now, which I think is a shame, that you're selling one of the most precious food items for striped bass, And anyway, that's another position we should kind of clarify. So anyway, those are the points with the glass eel fishery that I think were too conservative, much too conservative. If I were to look at every state and every little tributary that attracts a glass eel run, I'd almost say give an industry a license on one little stream to take all the glass eels that have no upstream holding capacity, no silver eel contribution, but at the point when they're orienting to that particular stream for olfactory purposes, I know, because I fished several of these streams experimentally when we were looking at starting eel farms, you could make $200,000-300,000 just by that little stream with a dip net or a little wick fishery. So, you know, I kind of just, you know, want to stimulate the people who are in the business of assessment of stocks. Get out in the field. Take a look at what this glass eel fishery is in the spring. And I think we're way too limiting ourselves into the economic opportunities or to the, you know, the other facet of it, if you don't grow food, is to restocking. Far more important to restock a few streams and see if it works than to sell them for bait.
Tom?
I've been very quiet, but when Lance starts basically trying to equate sending foreigners out fish to eat, to raise out, and we talk about an industry that basically puts charter boat captains, tackle stores, boats out there fishing for striped bass. It makes up $1 billion industry, or $1.3 billion industry in New Jersey. So I'm worried about people, home jobs, basically charter boat captains, tackle stores, that basically depend on bait to sell to their customers. And it's also a quality of life. They might not want to eat them. I mean, I've used eels for bait for about 50 years. And it's, you know, it's an important part of that experience to go. It was always fun trying to basically handle them. But to say that is not as valuable as a food fish, you're making your economic decision on there. Well, I would like to know the tackle stores and everybody else, the charter boats that depend on that, are really, we feel a lot differently about shipping them overseas. Because these are homegrown industries, homegrown businesses, and small mom and pop operations.
Okay, we've gone around the horn. Not all the way yet. Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see this as being two issues. Whether Dr. Daniels chooses to issue a permit for this eel farm is one thing, and I think it should be something that he can accomplish on his own. The issue of acquiring product for that experimental farm, whatever you want to call it, is another issue. And I think the very concept of allowing a state to have access to the glass eel fishery is very wrong, especially at this point in time. 13 states don't have access to the fishery. And as Paul Diodati says, you know, anybody can, and Richie White also, we would want to be at the table too. So I think this whole idea of allowing a harvest of a product that, not a product, a fish that belongs to the public is wrong at this time. And using a legislative term, this starts us down a very slippery slope.
Louis, reflecting upon the comments of the board, what's your pleasure?
To go home. I think there is scientific merit to the work. I believe the harvest, despite, you know, the advisory panel chairman's comments, I think it could provide some real benefit to the eel assessments in terms of locations and collecting information on where they occur. We have very little information on eels in North Carolina. The other thing I'm very interested in is the replanting and having a portion of those eels, if they can be tested to be egg crisis free and et cetera, be able to put some of those back in the water. And that could, you know, that could be a measurable result that we could come from it. But I hear, you know, the angst. I mean, everybody around this table has the ability to make this request, so I don't feel guilty for making the request. You know, and I think it was a good idea. I know American Eel Farm is a bona fide place with bona fide people that have put a lot of time, effort, and energy into it. Now, whether the business plan is sound or not, I don't know. That's not my job. But he seems to think he can make a go of it, make a living of it, so I was trying to do everything I could to help him. So with that said, and with my explanation to Mr. Augustine and Mr. Diodati, I agree with the concerns that have been raised. But I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to accept our request. And if I get a second, I'm done talking about it. But go ahead and put it up for a vote and, you know, let the chips fall on a slippery slope.
Motion made by Dr. Daniel. Is there a second? You're from South Carolina? Okay. Well, you're by yourself. I can understand that. Paul, and then I would like to go to Mr. Allen too before we have a vote on this. After you, Paul.
I guess just a question, and I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this, Mr. Chairman, but someone here might. This can't be the only time a state has issued a scientific permit or special permit to harvest a number of elvers in order to do research. And I think it probably happens more often than we think. We typically don't see that request here, probably at the commission. It's probably done as a unilateral action. You may have done it in your own state. I don't know. Have you? Okay. That answers the question. So I guess you know, maybe it comes down to a matter of scale. If you know, a professor at a local university sent in a request to harvest 500 elvers to conduct a study, I would probably not bat an eye in terms of issuing a scientific permit to go ahead and do that. And you know, so I think in considering this, if it's truly a scientific permit that we're talking about, then maybe it becomes a matter of scale, and the board may want to consider what that scale is in the future, so that we don't have to entertain this kind of a letter if it's below a certain amount. It's a scientific permit, and the state's free to do what they want. So.
Thanks. Before I go to Mr. Allen, Louis, you haven't spoken with the technical committee yet, have you?
The PDT met about it and had some discussion on the issue, and I don't believe they supported it. They supported it as long as the minimum size limit was 9 inches. They'd have to grow, I think, and I think I'm speaking, Kate can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was their recommendation, that it would have to they would have to meet the minimum grow out size limit of 9 inches.
Kate?
The PDT discussed this, you know, discussed aquaculture in as much as like what was included in the draft addendum, and the specific requirement that the PDT wanted to make sure was included in the addendum was that every proposal that was brought forward would be reviewed by the technical committee and approved by the board. And this permit request was not sent to the technical committee.
Okay, Mr. Allen, can you find a mic somewhere? What's that? Is public member.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I would like to, my name is Rick Allen from American Eel Farm. At this time, I'd like to give Willie Bocalar an opportunity to speak for a few minutes, and I'm going to follow up with a few minutes. He's an agriculture expert.
We're running late, so a few minutes would be really appreciated.
Good afternoon. My name is Willie Bocalar. I used to be the owner of the indoor farm which Mr. Allen right now owns. I used to operate in the state of Virginia, and I farm raised 1,200 pounds of baby eels over there at a very high successful survival rate, above 90%. I'm here to plead for the agriculture industry for the future, because I know it's a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. I support American Eel Farm for 100% for the simple reason that he is the only one who has a viable solution for the resource. You all want a new industry to develop in the United States. I have people who want to invest large amount of money in agriculture, eel farming in the United States, including building a factory, and include restocking. Not taking away anything from the resource, but even improving the resource. But the problem is, this country has no protocol. If you as a businessman has $10 million in the bank, want to build 3 or 4 agriculture systems in the United States, and employ fishermen and employ people, and improve the resources, that cannot be a bad idea. American Eel Farm pilot program can be the first step, a stepping stone to a new industry. We have all kinds of ideas floating around how to restrict the baby eel fisheries or the alpha fisheries. Nobody has an idea how to improve the stock. The agriculture is the solution, but there is no protocol in this country. And I defend American Eel Farm because it is the first step. 750 pounds might be a gigantic amount in many people's eyes, but it's a small step forwards. A big grow-out farm will need a lot more. If somebody wants to make a big investment for the food and the processing, they will employ hundreds of people. They will invest millions and millions of dollars. American Eel Farm could be the first step that everybody can agree on a protocol for the agriculture industry, because that is what's lacking. Lacking a vision. And this is the opportunity for this board to do something different instead of going around in circles and circles and circles and be totally paralyzed. Because what I have seen today is total paralyzed. Nothing happens. Do something instead of talking. This is all.
Mr. Allen.
Well, I didn't know he was going to reprimand you, but anyhow. Clearly, I have invested a lot of time and effort. I just met Willie. In fact, after, I'm sorry, I forgot your name that I met you with. Yes. I met Willie after I met you. Briefly, here's the history. February of this year, I bump into Mr. George Coons. He tells me, I got an eel farm. I said, great. He said, you can grow them out to adult eels. I said, great. I do some research. I find out that the eel business is a growing business, so I'm willing to invest money. So I buy into the farm. I immediately get a South Carolina dealer's license. It was late in the season. We didn't get much done. We get a license in Maine. I go up to Maine, I get my license, and I'm on the shore of St. Croix River. And I'm standing there speaking to an individual. His name is Larry. And I say, you know, I'm the proud new owner of an eel farm, the only one in the country. I'm going to get aquaculture going. He said, okay, fine. What do you have? What advantage do you have? He said, I pay 19. You pay 19, I pay 19.50. You pay 2,000, I pay 2,050. You have no advantage there. I said, okay, that makes sense. And then he said, and we buy the eels here. We take them back to China. We grow those eels out because you can't beat us on labor cost. And we're going to sell them back to you. That's the truth. You want the reality? That's the reality. Step one begins with this farm, which is a fingerling farm. And yes, I started out under the impression that it would be designed for adult eels. Because if you ever met George Coons, that's what he's like. Oh, no problem, you can grow adult eels. Well, I can grow adult eels. But after a visit to my farm from Marty, he called me and said, Rick, you can't grow adult eels successfully there. In fact, he offered to buy some of the equipment. And there are some other points I'd like to bring up here. You know, as far as getting fishermen, I've already met fishermen in North Carolina. They sell to Marty now. They gave me their number. They'd be happy to collect eels. As far as other eel farms, you know, I know Mitch made the point that there's an eel farm in Canada, but it's not operating, and he offered to sell it to me. So my point is, you did in Virginia the last time you did offer that. But anyhow, my point is that we need to start with aquaculture. We need to start with step one. There is not a step here. And this farm, I have since found out, is designed more for a fingerling farm rather than an adult eel. Right now, 50% of the seafood eaten globally is produced through aquaculture. The United States consumes half, the second in consumer behind China. The United States is ranked 15th in the world in aquaculture. U.S. produces 0.8% of aquaculture. Asia produces 88%. If you go to the mission statement of NOAA's website, they clearly say that it demands that aquaculture be investigated. I've done my part. When I came back from Maine, I sat with Lewis. I said, Lewis, is there anything we can do, because I've got to let go of this farm? He said, we might be able to do an experimental permit. I then went up to Maine, and I got in a car, and I drove from Maine all the way down to North Carolina trying to meet with everybody on this board to talk to them about aquaculture. And I'm just kind of, basically I've done my part. At this point, if this board wants to support aquaculture, they need to make an affirmative decision at this point. Otherwise, I'm done. I've done my part. I don't have any other investors. This is a life cycle. You've got the first life cycle of a fingerling. Then you've got the life cycle of a yellow eel, and then you process it out. So the first step has to be taken with this species, and that's a fingerling farm, and that's what I found out that I have, is a fingerling farm. Ideal for that purpose. And it is the first step that will get aquaculture off the ground.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go back to the board. And see
As far as one other comment, as far as...
No more comments, thank you. We're going back to the board. If anybody has any burning desire to speak, Dennis.
I won't call it a burning desire, Mr. Chairman, but would a motion to limit debate be in order? I think that we've talked about this long enough, and I think everyone's had the opportunity to speak.
You're actually, this is the one time you're half a step behind me. And I'm going to look at the table. Does anybody have anything burning they want to provide? We've gone around the table. There are a lot of opinions been made. Okay, we're going to. Why doesn't everybody caucus, and we're going to move the question. Move to accept North Carolina's scientific permit request for 750 pounds of glass eel harvest. Motion made by Dr. Daniel and seconded by Mr. Self. Folks ready to vote? Okay. Those that support the motion of the board, please put your hands up high. And those opposed? Those abstaining? Okay, the motion fails 114-3. We're on to other business, and I've got one issue. Russ.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As New Jersey was moving forward with our regulatory process in compliance with Addendum 3, we realized that there was no chance to get our Addendum 3 deal reporting requirement in place by January 1, 2014. So we're asking a little leeway and some compassion from the board. We're not sure how long it'll take, but probably won't get it done until probably late summer of next year. And I'm not sure if other states are in the same boat as us. We do not have a comprehensive deal reporting system in place, and everything that we just went through with Menhaden has left us scratching our heads, and we still haven't got that finalized on how we're getting all that reporting system in place for all the different areas where we found there were dealers that we didn't really know about. We were hoping to get that taken care of first and then move on to eels. So we're looking, and I can make a motion if that's necessary, but I was just looking to see if we could get some consensus from the board that we could delay that part of the implementation of Addendum 3 for New Jersey and other states if that's the necessary process. Thank you.
Russ, I think it'd be cleaner if you made a motion.
Will do. I'll make the motion, and if people aren't comfortable with the date that I use, I would take a friendly to finalize that. But I move to delay implementation of the Addendum 3 dealer reporting requirement until January 1, 2015. And hope I can get a second.
Is that New Jersey specific or for all states?
I would say for all states. If any other states are in the same boat as us, if they already have that in place, then they don't need to worry about it. But I'm not sure how other states are, what kind of situation they're in.
Is there a second? Second by Jim Gilmore. Is there a need for any discussion? Richie.
Question, if you said summer of 2014, then couldn't it be implemented right away?
I wish I knew a date in hand, and I just used that as a date, but I'm willing to change that date if it helps out the board. It could be September 1st, 2014, or something of that nature, because I'm not real sure on our regulatory process when it will get finished.
Follow up?
Richie.
I guess I'd like to know if there are any other states that are in the same situation. I'm concerned about undoing this for one state.
Tom?
Yeah, we're still trying to figure it out, but we're not going to be in as bad of a situation. We're probably looking at early spring for Maryland.
Dave?
Getting numb here. I won't tell you what I had to ask my colleague. Yeah, eels, dealer reports, they're not sold as seafood, so they don't go through our dealers. So I don't know how we're going to deal with this at all, except for direct reports from fishermen.
So are you more comfortable with January 1st or September 1st?
Well, it's a practical matter. I don't know that we'd ever be able to actually do it.
Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm okay with January 1st. I mean, we're late on a bunch of stuff right now, and I think our neighboring state is still, which Russ didn't mention, but the nightmare of the Sandy aftermath is just killing us with all this extra work we got to do. So it's very difficult to get a whole bunch of things done. So January 1st is fine with me.
Bob?
Russ, you may have mentioned this, but the individual fishermen are reporting. It's just the dealer side of things. So you feel you're capturing the landings. It's not, you're just not getting it from both sides.
Correct.
Are there any further comments? Okay, let's call the question. Those who support the motion on the board, please indicate so. And those are opposed? And those are abstaining? And okay. And is there a no? We don't have enough. 15. We have 15 to 0. Well, the motion carries anyhow. Is there any other business come before the board? Seeing none, we will reconvene this party at the February meeting. But before we do that, very quickly, I want to recognize Brad Chase as his last official day of TC chair. You've done a terrific job. You've kept me on my toes. And I'm pleased to say I've learned a lot from you, so thank you. And we welcome Sheila Eiler as our new TC chair. So thank you, Brad.
We'll get the policy board going in about 5 or 10 minutes, I think, or 2. George LaPointe's our first presenter, and he's got to catch a plane in a few minutes, so we got to turn it around pretty quick.